So yeah, we will be doing recoil. So like recoil deep dive by Hercule. So yeah, let's start. I already did some of it before, so uh, yeah, like it will not be from the beginning, but after that, I'll make sure that in less than 10 minutes, I'll get all of my concepts revised. Okay. So till now, we have learned about atoms, we have learned about selector, we have and why both of them are used, how to get a react recoil from like recoil, how to use recoil. Okay. So yeah, let's start. I was in V 7.4. What was
Let's open this up.
wait a minute. Terminal. Uh, This is the thing I hate most. Like WSL, like it takes its terminal takes too much time to get loaded. And Ubuntu, it was just like it, there wasn't any delay.
Get back the data.
We'll be learning about asynchronous data queries, like how should we get the data to our atoms from an
Put it in your recoil state. How would you do this? I've written some starter code already, which is available here as well. So if you go to, why am I playing sad songs here? If you go to github.com/100x steps cohort /7.4, you will see 7.4 async queries. Download this, open this up locally, and that is the starter code for this section of the video. If you look at the code, I have modified it slightly to make things a little bit simpler, easier, and consolidated. But at a high level, it does what you would assume an app like this does.
wait a minute, ls readme index.html package updation read config.
How would have you built something similar if you knew recoil wasn't in the picture? You would have had a global state variable.
Yeah, let's start. I think I'll go backwards. cd code dot. Why is it installing VS Code again? Why? What the hell? 1%? I was just curious if OBS works on Linux. I'll just transfer to Linux then. It's just way too much slow. Installing take too much time. What the hell? I'll again move to Ubuntu, I guess. But the problem with Ubuntu was that my camera was working. I'll ask Acer support for it. Like, I always ask them, right? Acer. Yeah, it works in if I open directly and it doesn't work and it starts downloading. What the hell is wrong with this WSL? I'll just close this down. I'm already in week 7. Unless, oh, okay, okay. CD dot CD dot ls uh, file open folder and tutorial. No, not a tutorial. Assignment week 7. And fly load assignments. We have folder name week 7, right? Shit, yeah, what the hell? CD week 7, and I'll do your code part. Yep, now it works properly. Okay,
Here, you could have would have been like const
easy peasy.
notification counts
I see. And what
set
this is.
notification counts equal to use code. I have modified it slightly to make things a little bit simpler, easier, and consolidated. But at a high level, it does what you
Recoil rules that is used to wrap the component recoil elements in use. Right, right.
would assume an app like this does. How would have you built something similar if you knew recoil wasn't in the picture? You would have had a global state variable here. You could have would have been like const um, notification counts set notification counts equal to use state empty object, and then you would have had an effect with an empty dependency array, which means this code should run on render
On
or
render.
on mount of this specific component,
Yes,
and you would send a backend request, get back the data, and update it in the state,
yes.
and then finally use this variable throughout your application. That is how you would have done it if this was not a recoil application. But now that we're doing state management using recoil, what can you do? You can be like, okay, number one, I'm going to consolidate all of these into a single atom. So if you go to atoms.js here, you will notice I've consolidated all of them into a single atom rather than having 4 different atoms. This is just for ease of looking at this atom and not having like 4 different places to track. You can totally go down the other route as well. But this will make things slightly easier. If you do go down the other route, you will have to change things a bit when you're reaching asynchronous data queries. I can explain what that is at the end as well. This will make your life slightly easier. So I've consolidated it into an atom. Atom now is an object or returns an object rather than a single number, and it has 4 keys.
Okay,
Let me default this to an empty object to begin with, and eventually values will be propagated here.
fine.
I have the other selector as well that sums up all 4 of these keys whenever they get propagated here. So this is still the same as before. This is a single atom where I've consolidated everything. Feel free to pause and understand this code base. Now, in the use effect, what am I saying? I'm saying I'm going to still send the request out, and I'm going to, when I get back the data, update this network count atom, put the data here, and then we're good to go. Only difference of this from how we've done things until now is rather than using useState, I have defined an atom that is storing my complete state. Which basically means all my notification counts,
Use
and
recoil.
this other thing is just dependent on this.
Yes.
Now that I have this,
Use recoil state.
I finally render The four notifications: network account.networks, network accounts.jobs, messaging, and notifications. And then
Yes.
finally, a button at the end that shows you the sum of all the notifications. Basically, the same app we created a while back. Feel free to look at the whole thing top to bottom, pause it, clone it locally, try it out, and you should see the things work as expected. If I go here, you see something broke.
Okay, I will have to install npm. What? npm syscall open error number -2 couldn't read package.json. Where is package.json? Here it is. Why isn't sudo npm run? Why is it not working? What the hell is wrong with it? किस स्टेशन की स्पेलिंग गलत है क्या? क्या है ये? स्क्रिप्ट्स में दिया तो है। क्या? to see a list of scripts run npm run अब npm run किया। ओह एक भी नहीं है। अच्छा, cd 7.4 easy bits। बात ये है कि कोड झूठ नहीं बोलता, कंप्यूटर झूठ नहीं बोलता। तो you should see like what folder you are in। फोल्डर नेमिंग का एक कोर्स ही बताया लगता है। फोल्डर के बीच में ये नहीं आने चाहिए, स्पेस नहीं आना चाहिए, वरना वाट ही लग जाएगी। ओके, इसमें ऐसा सही हुआ है। अब व्हाट विल टीच नेक्स्ट?
I probably need to give default values here. Let me give it a default value of 0. This will all not be a problem soon when we actually solve it the right way. This is actually the wrong way to solve it. Let me give default values of 0. Now if I refresh, it works as expected. You see a flash for a second, as you can see. 0 for a second, and then eventually they get fixed. We will see how to fix this later as well.
दूसरे टैब्स में क्यों नहीं खोल रहा है ये? है पागलपन की है ये। इस पे मैंने काम किया है क्या? असिंक क्वेरीज में जाके चलाओ तो कोड। लग तो यही रहा। तो यार एरर निकालने में इतना टाइम लग जाएगा तो इंसान सीखेगा कब यार?
But we have a basic functioning application.
या
How you would build it if you did not know the way to do it in Recoil. This is how you would do it. If you were like, Acha, rather than storing it on state, I will just store it in Recoil and we're good to go. Is this the right way? No. But this is a dumb first principles approach of solving this problem.
राइट।
कि हाँ, rather than storing things in state, I'm going to store them in Recoil. And I have an app finally that is sending out a request to the backend, some server.100xdev.com/notifications, getting back a response, and then with the response, actually rendering it on screen.
यस।
This guy being the final accumulation of all the values here.
राइट।
This is not the right way to do
भाई।
asynchronous queries in Recoil. The reason for that is there are a few reasons. Number one, as you see, there was a flash. There is a flash of zero, and then eventually you see the values populated. The reason for that is you have an effect here. Firstly, the default value will get
गेट।
rendered. Then
यस।
once the default value is rendered, the request goes out, response comes back. Then you render the actual thing, which is why there is a small flash. If I zoom in here, you will see zero here for a second, and then the
हाँ।
actual value is propagated.
या
That is the first problem.
या
The other problem is it's just a lot of ugly code. All of this should probably reside together, specifically this specific logic. This axios.get should somehow reside here. I shouldn't give it a default value of zero. I should be like, bhai, this atom is going to hit the backend, get back the data, and then that will be the default value of this notifications atom. You shouldn't default it to zeros and then eventually change things here. That is the other problem for this approach. So what do we want? We want K, rather than returning a synchronous object here, I want to actually hit the backend, get the data and store that here. Basically move this use effect in here. How can we do that is the question. Can we do this? Can default be a function that does, an axios.get,
नो।
and then, whatever data you get, you return?
बट कैन वी
Can I do
मेमोराइज इट?
this? If I can convert this into an asynchronous function, which actually hits the backend, gets back the data, and returns the data, this would be nice. This would be one way to get rid of this effect right here.
यस।
All the network count computation or this specific computation resides in the atom itself.
यस।
But this will not work.
व्हाई?
If I refresh this page, you will see an error. The error basically is that this cannot be a function basically. The default value for an atom needs to be synchronous, or it can be a selector which can be asynchronous. This is where the concept of asynchronous data queries comes into the picture. Specifically, how do you solve for this specific use case inside Recoil? Let's go to Recoil docs and see what it says. If you go,
We'll also go to recoil logs. Let's see what's the fuzz about. Recoil logs. मुझे भी बनना है भाई खतरनाक कोडर. All we can do is we can add async over here, and after us having async, we will do const data uh, with const data is equals to await axios dot get the URL and then return data. Yeah, that's so simple. The point here is that we will get an error because we will get an error over here because yeah, it should either be synchronous default value should either be synchronous or asynchronous selector. And then this we go recoil docs selector. Selector represents a function or a derived state in recoil. Derived state in recoil. Okay. What is a selector? It is a function, represents a function or a derived state. You can think of them as an uh, you can think of them as similar to an idempotent or pure function without side effects that always return the same value for a set of dependency values. If only get function is provided, the selector is read only and returns the recoil value read only object. If a set is also provided, then it returns a writable recoil state. Okay. It will have a get and also it can have set. But why is there a question mark? Because it is optional. Recoil manages atom and selector state changes to know when to notify components subscribing to that selector to re-render. If any object value of the selector is mutated directly, it may bypass this and avoid properly notifying subscribing components. To help detect bugs, Recoil will freeze uh, selector value objects in development mode. Okay, shit, this is next level shit, bro.
Go to guides here. The first thing after atoms and selectors is asynchronous data queries.
Okay, basic tutorial guides for synchronous data queries. Okay,
Recall provides a way to map state and derive state to react points. The important bit to read through here is this one right here. Selectors can be used as one way to incorporate asynchronous data into the recoil data graph. What's really powerful is that the functions in the graph can also be asynchronous. This makes it easy to use asynchronous functions in synchronous React components and render functions. Recall allows you to seamlessly mix synchronous and asynchronous functions in your data workflow. Yada yada yada. Feel free to read through this. You will not understand it the first time. You will understand it as you spend more time doing this and then come back to it later on. Basically, if I would have given you this problem statement to begin with, is when you would have, hit your head left, right, and center and try to figure it out yourself. And then eventually this would have made sense. Since I'm giving you the solution up front, this might not make sense right now, but eventually might. What is the high level? High level is selectors can be used as one way to incorporate asynchronous data into the recoil data flow.
I will do this and read recoil docs.
Please keep in mind that selectors represent idempotent functions for a given set of inputs. This is we cached, restarted, or even valid multiple times because okay, sounds good. All right, let's look at the logic. This is sort of important to know what is idempotent and why are they saying selectors are idempotent. Why should you remember this? We will come to this if need be, but you will basically see problems when you have.
मैट्रिक्स की पावर अगर n कर दी जाए तो वो आइडम पोटेंट मैट्रिक्स होता है या What is idempotent? And property of certain operations in mathematics and computer science that where they can be applied in times, multiple times without changing the result from the initial application. The result of idempotence in the number of abstract algebra should be asked.
Have asynchronous selectors like we are doing right now, and you want to do, for example, if I change this problem statement and I tell you, okay, you have to constantly poll the backend, is when you will see this becomes important. But for now, I just asked you to do it once. So let's see how to do that. What's the logic that they've written? They basically say, if you are defining an atom that needs to have an asynchronous output, what can you do? Let's see. There you go. That looks right. This is how you would write your atom if you know its default value is going to come from an asynchronous function. I repeat, if you know the default value of an atom, which in our case is all these notification counts, if you know they're going to come asynchronously, this is how you would write your atom. You would give it the key and you would say default is a selector, because you cannot have asynchronous default values.
Okay.
This cannot be an asynchronous function, but this can be a selector. So the default value is a selector in itself, which you can give it whatever key you want. You can call it network atom selector.
Okay.
And here the get function can be asynchronous. I repeat, here the get function can be
asynchronous.
What was get usually in selectors? It was a function, right?
Yeah.
So this function can actually be async. Does not depend on anything, so we don't have to worry about get. And here I can run all of this logic. This is the syntax, which is
data. I forgot here to write data dot data. Shit. I named it data. I'll change the name to res. Res. Res.
This might seem a little ugly. Up until now, it looked like this. This was an object. Now, this is not an async function. It is a selector, which you can give a random key to. Yeah. Important thing is the get of the selector. Just like this selector has a get, this selector also has a get. This can be asynchronous, which is why we're able to hit the database or the backend, get back the data and return. Yes. This is how you would do asynchronous data queries and give an async value to a notifications atom. If I go back and refresh, it does not work because Axios is not imported. Let me import Axios at the top. Now if I refresh, seems to work as expected. You might have a few questions. Like specifically, this is an async function. How is this rendering? Why do you not see the flash, the 0 followed by some buttons, which we will get to soon enough when we answer or when we reach this section of use recoil state loadable. For now, if you have the question of Harkirat, if I'm refreshing, how are their values coming here initially? It takes a few seconds for the data to come back from the backend. So how are they immediately coming? Why is there not a flash here? And the answer is there is a flash. You don't see it because the flash is a white screen itself. It's no longer, zeros being present here. That's not the flash. The flash now is, initially the screen is completely white until the backend actually responds back with something, and then you see the values here. You can confirm that by adding an artificial delay here. Right now this request is resolving very quickly, so you don't see it. I can add an artificial delay here. I can make this thread, not the thread sleep, but like the function sleep right here by writing this logic. What this does, I would urge you to take it as an assignment and understand how exactly this sleeps for 5 seconds, how exactly this logic makes the thread sleep for 5 seconds. I'm not going to go into that here, but this is not too difficult to understand how this one line of code will make sure that yahan first it waits for 5 seconds and only then the request goes out and only then you get back data. Why are we doing this? To see if this backend request took a really long time, let's say 20 seconds, then would we see the buttons, and what only then you get.
Let's see here. I will have a photo taken of it, and I'll do it after class. What was the done? Yeah, I haven't started the. Mm, what was to be a promise? How it sleeps for. How it sleeps for 5 seconds.
back data. Why are we doing this? To see if this backend request took a really long time, let's say 20 seconds, then would we see the buttons? And what would the values be in the buttons during those 5 seconds? Would they be zero? Would they be undefined? Would they be something else? So I've added the artificial delay right here. If I refresh, you will see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There was a white screen for 5 seconds. Basically means nothing renders until this function actually resolves. Harkirat, that looks very ugly. It does. Harkirat, how can I add a loader here? That's the default behavior, right? You should probably see a loader here for 5 seconds before the buttons come. We will get to it very soon once we reach this logic of use recoil state loadable. Cool. So what have we learned? We have learned asynchronous data queries specifically for cases like these when you want to initialize an axios.get, initialize based on an axios.get or some asynchronous operation. This is how you would initialize the notifications atom or whatever you want. Basically, if you want to get your users data, for example, whenever you go to app.100xdev.com, you either see sign in here or log out here based on whether or not the person is logged in. You see join Discord and assignments here only if the person has made at least one purchase. So these also resolve based on an atom value, which again is initialized like this by sending something to the backend and getting back some data and checking whether or not this user is actually logged in. So this sort of a very other common important standard atom that you will see would be the user atom, which will be like will do the same thing, but here you will hit another backend route that will actually tell you whether or not the user is logged in. Cool. That's it for asynchronous data queries. This is the final solution. Basically, the notifications atom changes like this, and then here I don't have to do the use effect. I don't have to do any backend sending data logic here. Everything happens here. How do we get rid of the initial flash, or how do I put a loader in there until the request is going out? We will see very soon. All right, that's it for this section. Let's see if I've missed something else here. Asynchronous data queries, I've covered this, and that's done. Next up, we're going to understand atom family, selector family, use recoil state loadable, and use recoil. This will be value. So use recoil value loadable.
Fine. Now I will code it. So yeah, I can do remove my screen. Yep. 7. So yeah, what was taught over here, like we can use this use effect. We can use this use effect, but it will. Hmm, what was the reason again? When the data is, yeah. We had a white flash, a white flash of very low time, like no, is it not present? Let's concentrate. 0. Why is it running 2 times? Okay. Like if we remove the strict part index.js, I think the app.jsx, main.jsx, I have removed it already. So why is it getting rendered twice? Eh? I don't know. Oof. So yeah, that is the reason. Like it flashes for a very low amount of time. Does it have any? where I am right now in async query, right? Okay, this is easy bits. And this app.jsx, and it's item fine. Okay. Default value is already given to us. 0. I'll change all of them. Alt 0. Fine. Now let's see how it works. 0, 0, 0. Okay, 0. Okay. So yeah, that's how it will work if I have an use effect over here. But we don't want use effect over here. We will have to do it over here. But in Atom, we cannot have an asynchronous state in default. We can have either synchronous function uh, or an selector. But guess what? Selector can have an asynchronous function. So when we use a selector and then we set its value, like key can be anything. Key we will set to uh what notification count. Okay, notification network. Okay, network selector. Network selector. Selector. We will add a comma. Then we will have an asynchronous function which will be declared inside get. Now here we do not have to care about any external value. So we will not use any get, like we will not use any get uh, parameters in the function. We will not pass any parameters in the function. So yeah, then we will have, as we have used async, we will do const res is equals to await axios dot get, and the whole I will use to control z axios dot get http servers notification control x atoms control v, and after this get we will have return res dot data. Fine, right? Why isn't anything? Eh? Should it get wrapped inside something? I'm not sure. Let's see in recoil docs. Recoil docs. Item putting function, asynchronous data queries. In this, it can either, it is written over here, the get, okay. Current user ID state. Current user ID. Where is the state now? Okay, current user. Now I get it. The most important thing in, okay, table of users, return table of users, get current user ID state dot name. Recoil root, we will have to use recoil root in which we are using any recoil functions. We will have selector error handling, queries with parameters, data flow, concurrent requests, prefetching, query default atom values. Yeah, here we can use slash. So we will, rather than using slash, we will not just name it like this. We will have network atom slash selector. Network atom slash selector. Like naming is very nice, no? And then we will set, okay, here it is synchronous. How can I get asynchronous queries without React suspense? What the hell is React suspense, bro? Async Same things are being used here, right? Like, what's wrong with my code? Why is it showing error over here? Is it? Just get. Should I just wrap it? No. Acha is SYN. See. What the hell, bro? Like, that's why we need Copilot. That's fucking waste of time. Oh, sheesh. And after this, like, if we set return new promise, right? Await new promise, not return. Await new promise. Promise is a class. Await new promise. R will go as a parameter, and then we will have set timeout of R comma 5000. If we would have done dot then it would have worked, right? But we are not using dot then now. Let's save it and then control S. We will remove this fetch function, use effect as a whole, get lost. Now, total notification selector. And this we'll have to set anything like notification, network count. Fine, it is correct most probably. Control S. 7 plus 6 plus 0 is not 22. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1 plus 2 is not 9. That's, is there a 6 का डिफरेंस है क्या? कुछ कुछ है, मैं गलती हो रही है. दो दो दो. इधर साथ में गलती हो रही है. क्या है ये? What the hell? नेटवर्क जॉब नोटिफिकेशन मैसेजिंग. टाइम आउट हटाओ 5 सेकंड का. हमेशा 5 सेकंड वेट नहीं करूंगा मैं. 4 6 8. इस बार 8 का फर्क. इस बार 9 का फर्क आएगा क्या? नहीं, इस बार तो एक का ही फर्क आया. माय नेटवर्क में रेंडर ही नहीं हो रहा. अब देखते हैं माय नेटवर्क में. नेटवर्क. नेटवर्क है इधर और इधर नेटवर्क्स किया है. नाउ लेट्स ट्राई. अब आई थिंक करेक्ट है. सही हो. राइट. नाउ व्हाट? नाउ वी विल मूव फॉरवर्ड. तो मैं अपना लिंक. ओके. मूविंग फॉरवर्ड.
All right, let's get into Atom family next. Let's begin with a problem as to what exactly does atom family provide you that you don't already get with atoms. The problem is that sometimes you need more than one atom for your use case. Kirat, that is fine. We just saw that a few slides ago where we had a few atoms. You can create multiple atoms. What's the problem there? I'll share very soon. For example, let's say you're creating a to-do application which has multiple to-dos.
Okay.
Question. Let's say I ask you to create a component that takes a to-do ID as an input and renders that to-do on screen. This is what a to-do looks like, has an ID, title, description, and completed. Completed basically means that you're finished with this to-do, so you can consider that as done. You get this from a backend. When you give it an ID, you need to store the to-do in an atom. You cannot use useState, so that is a prerequisite here. You have to store this in Recoil, and all to-dos can be hard-coded as a variable for now. Eventually, we will see how you hit a backend server and get these back as well. For now, assume you have a file. That file has all the to-dos listed down. How would you make sure you store values in atoms? And you create a component that takes an ID as an input and renders that to-do, which basically means renders the to-do which has that specific ID. Would you have a single atom in this case? Would you have one atom per to-do, or would you create and delete to-dos dynamically? How would you create and delete to-dos dynamically? Basically, the problem that will come here is, let's go to the code base and understand the problem a little bit better. So amongst the code bases for this library, for this class, atom family, this is the one that you need to open. And if you look at app.jsx, you will see this is what we have to do. Inside a recoil root, I am rendering the to-do component twice. And what does this to-do component have to do? Ignore whatever is happening here. It needs to get an ID, get the to-do from somewhere which it exists in this to-dos.ts file, should be JS because we're in JavaScript right now. Let me ignore whatever is happening here. It needs to get an ID, get the to-do from somewhere which it exists in this to-dos.ts file, should be JS because we're in JavaScript right now. Let me make things slightly easier. It should get the to-do with that specific ID from here and render it on screen. The only problem is this to-do needs to be fetched via an atom. So how would you basically, how would you dynamically create an atom? That's the problem here. You don't have a single atom. You can be like, Kirat, I will do, again, if you want, you can do it in a different file. Let me do it here. Const to do atom equal to atom. Key to do atom value or whatever default. Somehow get that specific to do, let's say something like this. You can be like, Kirat, I'll do this and I'm good to go. I have the to do atom. I can say const current to do equal to use recoil value with to do's atom, and I'm good to go. I can render this current to do over here. I would say that makes sense, but you've created a single to do atom, and these are two components that you are rendering, to do number one, to do number two. Both of these are getting the same atom. You have not dynamically created two different atoms for both the components. There is a single global atom that exists that is getting value in this component as well and this component as well. Can you see how this will become a problem very quickly? You cannot, what you ideally have to do is something like this. You have to, somehow create a new atom anytime a component is created, so that this has its own atom and this has its own atom. This is the problem with using just atoms. Atoms work when you know something is present only once on screen. But if you have a bunch of to-dos, each will need its own atom, so you'll have to dynamically create more and more atoms. You could argue, Kirat, I will create a single atom which stores the complete list of to-dos, an array here. I would say yes, you could do that. There are downsides to doing this. But I'm giving you the restriction of you have to create a dynamic atom for every to-do that you're entering here. Now, how would you do this? How would you, if there are 5 to dos that are rendered here, each needs to have its own atom. And of course, if 2 of them have the same ID, then they need to hit the same atom. This is another sort of, you could have done this, okay, you will initialize an atom here. But again, if 2 to-dos have the same ID, they need to hit the same atom. They need to get value from the same atom. If 2 to-dos have different values, is when you have to create a fresh atom for them. How would you solve this problem? And this is the exact problem that atom family comes to solve. What is the problem? If I go back to the slides, the problem is, okay, each component needs to create its own atom. Would you have a single atom? You could have a single atom that has all the to-dos. You have a restriction just from my side for now. Okay, you cannot do that. There are also downsides to doing that. But let's assume that we throw away the downsides for a while. You have a single atom per component. How would you create them? Basically something like this. Every component needs to have its own atom now, and you have to dynamically create them, delete them. And if a component is rendered twice, then that specific component, if the ID is the same, it needs to hit the same atom. So if I give, as I showed, if all of these have the same ID, 2 over here, they need to reach the same atom in the end. How would you solve this problem? And the answer is using atom family. Okay, you will, rather than subscribing to the atom, you would subscribe to the atom family. This basically means that whenever you know there are multiple atoms, where you have to create one atom per item, you create an atom family, call it the to-dos atom family. And here you be like, okay, bhai, whoever is calling me, tell me what to-do ID do you need values for. I will give you a new atom for that to-do ID. I repeat, what does atom family give you? It says that bhai, if a component wants a new atom from me, or an atom specific to an input from me, it will give me the input. I will return it back that specific atom. And this is how you can dynamically create more and more atoms for a use case similar to the one that I'm showing right now. Let's look at what that looks like when you're writing the code. Until now, we've done something like this. Let's say the atom exists somewhere. We've done something like this. Const current to do equal to use recoil value.
Is teaching, yeah. I'll just take a 2 to 5 minutes break.
बीते दिन यानी 6 जून को चंडीगढ़ एयरपोर्ट पर एक महिला सीआईएसएफ जवान ने बॉलीवुड एक्ट्रेस और मंडी से बीजेपी सांसद कंगना रनौत को जोरदार थप्पड़ जड़ दिया। देखते ही देखते इस घटना का वीडियो भी सोशल मीडिया पर खूब वायरल हो रहा है। वीडियो के वायरल होते ही ये मामला तूल पकड़ने लगा और कल से ही लगातार सुर्खियों में बना हुआ है। इस वीडियो के सामने आते ही लोगों के मन में कई सवाल हैं। आखिर ये महिला सीआईएसएफ जवान कौन है? कड़ी सुरक्षा के बीच भी उन्होंने ऐसा क्यों किया? और आखिर इस थप्पड़ के पीछे का असली कारण क्या है? तो आइए आज इस वीडियो में आपके इन्हीं सवालों का जवाब देते हैं। चंडीगढ़ एयरपोर्ट पर कंगना रनौत को तमाचा मारने का मामला लगातार गर्माता जा रहा है। इस मामले का वीडियो सोशल मीडिया पर लगातार वायरल होने के कारण अब अधिकारियों ने इस मुद्दे पर एक स्टेटमेंट भी जारी किया है। अधिकारियों ने बताया है कि महिला सिपाही का नाम कुलविंदर कौर है। कुलविंदर किसान प्रदर्शन पर कंगना रनौत के रुख को लेकर नाराज थी। उन्होंने आगे बताया कि इस मामले पर एक्शन भी ले लिया गया है और महिला सिपाही को निलंबित कर उसके खिलाफ एफआईआर दर्ज कर ली गई है। हवाई अड्डों की सुरक्षा का जिम्मा संभालने वाली सीआईएसएफ ने घटना के संबंध में कोर्ट ऑफ इंक्वायरी का भी आदेश दिया है। साथ ही कुलविंदर कौर को सस्पेंड भी कर दिया गया है। वहीं इस मसले पर किसान नेता शेर सिंह महिवाल का कहना है कि कंगना रनौत को तमाचा जड़ने वाली महिला कुलविंदर कौर और कोई नहीं बल्कि उनकी छोटी बहन है। शेर सिंह महिवाल ने कल एक बयान में बताया कि बीते 2 सालों से कुलविंदर कौर चंडीगढ़ एयरपोर्ट पर तैनात हैं। उन्होंने आगे कहा कि मुझे मीडिया के जरिए पता चला कि चंडीगढ़ एयरपोर्ट पर कुछ ऐसा हुआ है। अब जानकारी मिली है कि यह मामला कंगना के मोबाइल और पर्स की चेकिंग के दौरान हुआ। कंगना ने किसान आंदोलन के दौरान कहा था कि वहां 100 रुपए में महिलाएं आई हैं, जिससे कुलविंदर आहत हुई थी। शेर सिंह भाईवाल ने आगे कहा सुनी के बाद मेरी बहन भावनात्मक रूप से गुस्से में आ गई होंगी, जिसके कारण ऐसी घटना घटी। जवान और किसान दोनों महत्वपूर्ण हैं और हर मायने में अपना कर्तव्य निभा रहे हैं। हम इस मामले में उनका पूरा समर्थन करते हैं। मीडिया रिपोर्ट्स के मुताबिक इस घटना से पहले तक कुलविंदर कौर का सर्विस रिकॉर्ड अच्छा रहा है। उनकी 15 साल की सर्विस में इस तरह का कोई मामला सामने नहीं आया है। 35 साल की कुलविंदर पंजाब के कपूरथला जिले के सुल्तानपुर लोधी की रहने वाली हैं। कुलविंदर कौर के पति सीआईएसएस में हैं। उनके 2 बच्चे भी हैं। दूसरी तरफ इस घटना पर कंगना रनौत की प्रतिक्रिया भी सामने आई है। दिल्ली पहुंचने के बाद कंगना रनौत ने एक्स पर पंजाब में आतंक और हिंसा में हैरान करने वाली वृद्धि शीर्षक के साथ एक वीडियो बयान पोस्ट किया। कंगना ने वीडियो में कहा कि वो सुरक्षित और ठीक है। कंगना ने कहा कि उन्हें मीडिया और अपने शुभचिंतकों से ढेरों फोन आ रहे हैं। अभिनेत्री ने कहा कि महिला सिपाही उनकी ओर आई। कंगना ने कहा उसने मुझे थप्पड़ मारा और मुझे गाली देनी शुरू कर दी। उन्होंने कहा जब मैंने उससे पूछा कि उसने ऐसा क्यों किया तो उस सिपाही ने कहा कि वो किसान आंदोलन का समर्थन करती हैं। उन्होंने कहा मैं सुरक्षित हूं, लेकिन पंजाब में बढ़ते आतंकवाद को लेकर मैं चिंतित हूं। हम उसे कैसे संभालेंगे। इस खबर में बस इतना ही। ये खबर आपको कैसी लगी हमें कमेंट कर जरूर बताएं। देश दुनिया की तमाम बड़ी खबरों के लिए देखते रहिए न्यूज़ नेशन का डिजिटल प्लेटफॉर्म।
Hello, I'm back, Perfect. Yep, wonderful. Mm, let's start again.
Value a to do atom. This is what that looks like when to do this is how
I've
you
got this set for 40
and render
minutes.
it on screen. The only problem is this to do needs to be fetched while if you create with an ID as an input and renders that to do basically means renders the to do which has that specific ID.
So the question here asked is कि भाई क्वेश्चन तो समझ लो पहले बात तो सही है क्या इधर इस कोड के अंदर सिंक क्वेरीज प्रोग्राम छुपाओ इजी बुक्स को छुपाओ एटम फैमिली है ना कंट्रोल रिजल्ट cd dot atom family okay npmi okay npm render open browser what the hell go to gym hit the gym for some night go to eat from turn night to learn 2 घंटे काम करना है तो हम जाएंगे सोर्स में जाएंगे फिर उसके बाद जाएंगे ऐप डॉट जेएसएक्स में एट मेन डॉट जेएसएक्स में एंड उसके बाद यहाँ पे इसने एटम डॉट टीएस बनाया ओके फाइन भाई ऐप डॉट जेएस में इसने क्या सर ने क्या यूज किया है कि 2D1 2D2 रेंडर होना चाहिए स्क्रीन के ऊपर so it should return yeah it should take an id to do atoms family from dot slash atoms of ts to do's from dot slash to do's किधर है to do's ओके id ऐसा है to do's ये किया अगर आईडी जाती है तो अच्छा एटम फैमिली का ये सोल्यूशन ही है अच्छा बेसिक में क्या था बिना इसके तो ठीक है अब सोल्यूशन तो देख लिया समझ गई समझ लेते
Make sure you store values in atoms and you create a component that takes an ID as an input and renders that to do basically means renders the to do which has that specific ID. Would you have a single atom in this case? Would you have one atom per to do? Or would you create and delete to dos dynamically? How would you create and delete to dos dynamically? Basically, the problem that will come here is let's go to the code base and understand the problem a little bit better. So amongst the code bases for this library, for this class, atom family, this is the one that you need to open. And if you look at app.jsx, you will see this is what we have to do. Inside a recoil root, I am rendering the to do component twice. And what does this to do component have to do? Ignore whatever is happening here. It needs to get an ID, get the to do from somewhere which it exists in this todos.ts file should be JS because we're in JavaScript right now. Let me make things slightly easier. It should get the to do with that specific ID from here and render it on screen. The only problem is this to do needs to be fetched via an atom. So how would you basically how would you dynamically create an atom? That's the problem here. You don't have a single atom. You can be like Harkirat, I will do again, if you want you can do it in a different file. Let me do it here. Const to do atom equal to atom key to do atom value or whatever default, somehow get that specific to do, let's say something like this. You can be like, Harkirat, I'll do this and I'm good to go. I have the to do atom. I can say const
To do is equals to do atom.
current to do equal to
Use recoil state.
use recoil value
Use recoil value. To do atom.
with to do's atom, and I'm good to go. I can render this current to do over here.
Okay. Fine by me.
I would
No
say
problem at
that
all.
makes sense.
Yes.
But you've created a single to do atom,
Yes.
and these are two components that you are rendering: to do number 1, to do number 2.
Then it will
Both
not be like that कि हम उतने पहले बनाएंगे क्योंकि यार हमें बनाना ही है तो बहनचोद हम कोडिंग कर क्यों रहे हैं? As simple as
both
that.
of these are getting the same atom. You have not dynamically created two different atoms
Right.
for both the components. There is a single global atom that exists that is getting value in this component as well and this component as well. Can you see how this will become a problem very quickly? You cannot, what you ideally have to do is something like this. You have to, somehow create a new atom anytime a component is created, so that this has its own atom and this has its own atom.
पर हम
This is the
default
problem
इसके
with
अंदर
using just
हमारे
atoms.
पास नहीं
Atoms
शुरू हो
work
सकते.
when you know something is present only once on screen. But if you have a bunch of to-dos, each will need its own atom, so you'll have to dynamically create more and more atoms. You could argue, कि Harkirat, I will create a single atom which stores the complete list of to-dos, an array
Yes.
here. I would say yes, you could do that. There are downsides to doing this.
What are the downsides of doing it?
But I'm giving you the restriction of you have to create a dynamic atom for
Dynamic
every
atom
to-do
मतलब कैसे
that you're
बनाएं?
entering here. Now, how would you do this? How would you, if there are 5 to-dos that are rendered here, each needs to have its own atom. And of course, if 2 of them have the same ID, then they need to hit the same atom. This is another sort of,
Yeah.
you could have done this,
Would have
you will
happened in the
initialize
array.
an atom
There
here.
wouldn't have been any problem.
But again, if 2 to-dos have the same ID, they need to hit the same atom. They need to get value from the same atom. If 2 to-dos have different values, is when you have to create a fresh atom for them. How would you solve this problem? And this is the exact problem that atom family comes to solve.
ठीक है.
What is the problem? If I go back to the slides, the problem is
रटना है.
that each component needs to create its own atom. Would you have a single atom? You could have a single atom that has all the to-dos. You have a restriction just from my side for now. Okay, you cannot do that. There are also downsides to doing that. But let's assume that we throw away the downsides for a while. You have a single atom per component. How would you create them? Basically something like this. Every component needs to have its own atom now, and you have to dynamically create them, delete them. And if a component is rendered twice, then that specific component, if the ID is the same, it needs to hit the same atom. So if I give, as I showed, if all of these have the same ID, 2 over here, they need to reach the same atom in the end. How would you solve this problem? And the answer is using atom family. Okay, you will, rather than subscribing to the atom, you would subscribe to the atom family.
Okay.
This basically means that whenever you know there are multiple atoms, where you have to create one atom per item, you create an atom family. Call it the to-dos atom family.
Okay.
And here you be like, okay, bhai, whoever is calling me, tell me what to-do ID do you need values for. I will give you a new atom for that to-do ID. I repeat, what does atom family give you? It says that bhai, if a component wants a new atom from me, or an atom specific to an input from me, it will give me the input. I will return it back that specific atom. And this is how you can dynamically create more and more atoms for a use case similar to the
not creating 2 new items. It is just returning the item. It's not creating it. It's not getting stored anywhere, right?
one that I'm showing right now.
Yeah.
Let's look at what that looks like when you're writing the code. Until now, we've done something like this.
Yeah.
Let's say the atom exists somewhere. We've done something like this. Const current to do equal to use recoil value, a to do atom. This is an atom. If you replace this with an atom family, which basically means I would probably call it to do's atom or to do's atom family, whatever you want to call it. I'm going to leave it as to do atoms. You need to pass in the input. Okay, bhai, this is a family.
Yeah.
And I want which atom for them? I want
ID.
a to do with this specific ID. Yeah. So these inputs will uniquely give you an atom, which basically means if we'll see how you define the to do family.
Okay.
But given that it is already defined, how
Okay.
would you get a specific atom from there?
You will
You will not
pull.
do use recoil value atom family. You will be use recoil value atom family ka this
ID
specific atom. I want
that
this
will
atom
return
for this atom family.
because use recoil value is used for atoms only, right? So you cannot pass atom family to it. It would be
I
wrong.
want atom 1 from this atom family
Yeah,
and not the whole thing. I don't want the
right,
complete atom family. I
right,
just want atom 1 or the
right.
atom for this specific to do ID.
Yes,
And then from there, things are the same. So the only thing that has changed is that rather than getting an atom, you are telling an atom family that bhai, you will have multiple atoms which will be different based on this input. Give me the one for this specific input. And if
right.
the first to do gets rendered with ID 1, it will ask basically for this one. And then when the second one gets rendered, it will ask for this second atom, so on and so forth. Why this is cool is because now I can define multiple to dos with ID 2.
Yes.
All of them will try to
Go
get
to atom family and
the
then
second
return.
atom, which basically means this guy right here. It
Yes.
will not be like this will hit the second atom and this will hit the third atom, so on and
It
so
will
forth. All
dynamically
right,
create atoms.
cool.
What the hell?
Let's look at how can you
It will
define
dynamically
a
create
to-do
atoms.
family, sorry, an atom family. If you go to atoms dot, again, TS here, feel free to replace it with JS. This, I created this as a TypeScript project, I don't know why. So feel free to replace this with .js. And now look at it here. It looks slightly different. Number one, rather than writing equal to atom, I write equal to atom family. So I'm not doing
Yeah.
const to do atom equal to atom.
Yeah. It will
I'm not doing
take
this.
an ID.
Not doing this. What am I doing? Rather than atom, I've written atom family. Key is still the same. Every atom family needs a uniquely identifiable key for that family. In this case, it is, you can name it whatever you want. Just make sure it's not conflicting names ever. And lastly, the important thing, the default value is not a value anymore. It is a function.
The function.
Again, I've used an arrow function. Feel free to use a normal function. But the idea is that the default value here is that, bhai, I know this is a family. Tell me which atom do you want. Give me the inputs and I will return you the default value for that atom. For example, if this specific atom is wanted or asked for, this logic will run for that specific ID. And then if an atom with ID 2 is asked for, this logic will run again for that specific atom, so on and so forth. If the same atom is asked multiple times, then only the first time this will run, and then eventually it's just a cached value similar to how an atom is defined. So it's really nothing new. It's just a way for you to create multiple atoms.
Yes.
Is atom family. Atom family lets you dynamically create multiple atoms, which is exactly what we want in this use case. Okay, bhai, every value of ours needs to have its own atom. Every to do that's rendered here, 1, 2, 3, how many you render need to have an atom associated with them. And this is how you can create it. Now that I have this, this is what I'll use here to do atoms family.
Okay.
And I've imported it here at the top, use recoil value, and good to go. The important thing here is, another important thing to know is what is the logic that's running here. It's basically going through this hard-coded list that I have and trying to find that specific to do. In my case, this find function, if you don't know, is a very popular, similar to map and filter. It lets you find a specific function, a specific.
You take each and every element from them, each and every element from that array, and convert it to convert them by using a specific function which is passed through it, and we get the result of it. Filter is we search for an we pass a boolean function to it, like if that element of an array passes the quality, like passes the test of that function, it will, if it returns true, it will be in the resultant array, and if it doesn't returns true, it will not be in the result.
Specific value that follows these constraints. And what is the constraint in this case? Okay, bhai, given this ID, find a to do which has the specific ID. If there exists one, this returns that specific to do. If not, it returns null or undefined. You can test this out very quickly in the browser here. So if I write const arr equal to 1 2 3 4 5 equal to 1, if this is a complex object, you can make this complex and keep going. If you don't understand this logic, alag se filter, only this one lets you find a specific element. If this feels hard, you can also do, const found to do equal to null, and then iterate over this and then find the specific one with this given ID. Slightly cleaner though. All right. Now that I have this, if I refresh, if I of course run this, now I'm unsure if it will run considering it was all initialized with TypeScript. 7.
No, items family,
npm install. This needs to be a let. It doesn't render anything here, and it's probably because it's fine. Use recoil value is not defined. So I can go to app.jsx and import use recoil value. If I refresh, I see both the to-dos rendered here.
Yeah.
If I render multiple times the second one, I see the second one rendered multiple times. So what have we done? What is the new thing that has happened here? Again, this might feel, why does this look so clean, Harkirat? Why is the background gray? Why are the font so good? It's because I haven't removed the default CSS. If you remove the
telling this bacha things now.
default CSS here, you will see an uglier to-do as well. Given this, what is the new thing that has happened? What is the thing that Atom family did that we weren't already able to do with to-dos or with atoms?
We weren't able to create dynamic to-dos, and we weren't able to create a function which takes an ID and returns as an atom. That's what Atom family does in the background.
The problem with atoms was you can totally be like, okay, I will define atom 1 here and then atom 2 here and then atom 3 here, so on and so forth. But
how much
you can't keep track of how many, what the developer would put here, because these to-dos will also come from a backend.
Yep.
So there is no point of you to define these by hand. You need someone else who can create a new atom for you.
Yes.
So you can, if you really want to do this in house and you're like, Harkirat, I don't want to use atom family, you can create a function.
Yeah.
Give atom that actually returns you a new atom.
Yep.
And then call give atom of ID here, then it will work. That's probably what atom family does under the hood as well.
Yeah.
Okay, it returns an atom, which is why you have to call this, because this is a function that actually returns the atom to you. And it's not an atom in itself.
Yes.
So you can actually write this yourself if you want, but
why
they give you this out of the box, because this is something, this is a very common use case for you to want to store multiple to-dos, multiple.
ऐसी चीजें है भाई, अगर ये CPDSA की बात होती तो इम्प्लीमेंट करना सेंस बनाता, बट ये तो ऑलरेडी बनाया हुआ है. We just have to know the application, right?
Notifications, multiple posts on a LinkedIn feed. If I open my LinkedIn feed, you will see 1,000 posts here. It is a common use case for you to store all of these individually. This is a good post. Follow your passion is probably the worst. Agreed. So a good post.
Now let's see.
Follow your passion is probably the worst. Agreed. This is a good post. Follow your passion is probably the worst. Agreed. So you would commonly want to store all of these in different atoms. Again, as I said, you can totally be like Harkirat. I will be like export const to-dos atom equal to simply an atom whose key is atom and then default value. All of these don't re-render. So that is why you would want to probably have a separate atom for each one of these values, and atom family lets you do this. It is a function that effectively returns you an atom, which is why you have to call this function here, and this actually returns you a to-dos one atom basically, which is what you're using here. You basically can think of this as a function that returns you another atom. In fact, that might be the official definition as well. Let's see. API reference, utils, atom family returns a function that returns writable atom. Atom family returns a function is a function. If you call atom family here, it returns a function. So basically this value will store a function which returns a new atom to you. returns a function that returns a new atom view, basically lets you dynamically create atoms. And that is exactly what we need in this use case. Hakikat, does it create the same atom twice here? No. If you give it the ID 2 multiple times, it will only create an atom once for all of these. And if you update the value in one of them, it will update in the other ones as well. We can confirm that by doing this. I can basically be like, यहाँ पे I will get the update to do equal to use set recoil state for the second to do, and then after 5 seconds, I'm going to call update to do with some random ID remains the same, but title changes to new to do, description also changes to new to do. What have I done? I've said, okay, I'm going to get the atom with ID 2 and update it because I'm using use set recoil state here and update it with new values. Let's see which one of these actually gets updated. Do all of them get updated? Does only one of them get updated? Do none of them get updated? If I go here and refresh, you will see after 5 seconds, no one gets updated. That's a little fishy. I would have expected all of these to get updated unless I'm missing something. Component must be used inside recoil root. That makes a lot of sense. So let me move this inside another component, operator component. And here, this component can return an empty diff. And here I'm running logic to update after 5 seconds. Now let's wait for 5 seconds. And there you go. All of them got updated. What does this tell you? This tells you if you ever call to-dos atom family with some inputs, if those inputs are the same here and in all of these to-dos, basically the ones that have ID equal to 2, here, this will return you the same atom everywhere. It's similar to recoil under the hood having created a export const atom for to do 2 for you. It created an atom for you, and anytime someone asks the atom with ID 2, it returns the same atom to you, which is why value updated from one of them updates it in multiple places, which is what you want as well, right? If there are multiple to-do components rendered, if the value changes in one place, you want it changed in another place as well. And that is what atom family lets you do. This guy right here, feel free to try it out on your side. If you want to go through the docs, if you do not understand it well, you should. Can you work without it? Yes. As I said, you just create an atom which has all the to-dos in it. Should you? Maybe. But is this the most optimal way to solve, for example, the to-dos problem? Yes. This is probably the more optimal way to do it, rather than storing it all in a very big list which is not. All right. That's it for atom family. It sounds so much like atom
उसके अंदर वर्चुअल डॉम रियल डॉम बहुत
family every time I say it.
तो
And this
कुछ
is the final
कहना मेरे
solution.
को लगता है
Okay, you've created a to-do atom family with the default value of which is take an ID as an input and then return this. The important thing to know is the default value always, not always, you can actually probably make this a value as well if you want every atom to have a default value. But usually the default value would depend on the input. So you will put a function here rather than a number or a string or an object, because this function will take that ID as an input and then finally return you the specific output given that input. This is great, but what is this missing? This is missing what if this data is present on a backend? How do I get this data from the backend and actually render it here? Which is what we will discuss next when we get into selector family. All right. Next up, what's left? Selector family. And these two hooks that I need to discuss. Let's kick things off with selector family here. Yep. Selector family in the to-do application. This is fairly straightforward. So thankfully, we understand if you want asynchronous calls in an atom, you need a selector. And similarly, in our to-do application, if you were supposed to get to-dos from a backend, is when you need a selector family. So basically, if I tell you that this is an endpoint that you can hit that gives you a to-do given an ID as an input, how can you hit this specific server, get back the data from the server, and then use this data and render it rather than getting it from in memory, basically, which is how things were happening. Here, you will find another locally. This selector family pretty much writes the code for this. Okay, how can you render it rather than getting it in memory? There's a recoil root renders two to-dos. And again, this code looks fairly straightforward, simple. We've done this many times. Okay, get it from an atom. But if you look at the atom code now, it's slightly different from the atom code we wrote in the last slide. What was the atom code we wrote in the last slide? If I go to, would return the found to-do to you. Okay, basically, given this ID, it would iterate over this to-dos array and then finally return you the found to-do from this in-memory array. What do we have to do now? Actually hit a backend. And what did I say? Okay, bhai, atoms cannot have asynchronous backend calls in their default value. They need to use a selector. But when you're doing the same thing for an atom family, you cannot use a selector. You have to use a selector family. Basically, if you have an atom family where every do an asynchronous function here, I could not over here from a backend. You cannot.
ये कौन सा है भाई?
Do an asynchronous function here. I could not over here in our existing assignment just write,
मैं ट्राई करूंगा कि इसमें get use करके अगर ना हो तो कैसा होगा. What if I don't use get?
Get, where did it go? Atoms.js. I could not just write async and hit a backend here. As we've discussed, the default value for an atom or even for an atom family cannot be an asynchronous call or an asynchronous function. So what do? We pretty much say, if I go back to selector family slash atoms.ts, I say that the default value is going to be a selector family, which the default value for which can do an async call. But this is slightly different from selector. How did we create an async atom? We said const to do equal to atom. I said a selector which had a key, and then a get which was an async function. This is something we did a while back when we were discussing asynchronous data fetches, which was right here. When we discussed asynchronous data queries, I shared that code would look something like this. We would have an atom and the default value will be a selector, which will have an async function to get the final data. You have to do the same thing here, only this will boggle your head the first time or even the second time or how many times you look at it. What is this get here? It says it is a function which returns another function which returns this body. Again, this is slightly complicated syntax. You can actually write this a different way that will make this slightly easier to understand. Let me do that. This is how you should write it in production usually, but a slightly easier syntax is this. There you go. This is slightly easier syntax. Okay, bhai, for this to-dos atom family, whenever an ID is given as an input, return this specific function which can use this ID and then hit the backend and return the data. Feels complicated? It should. It is basically returning, it is equivalent to a function which is returning another function, which is why it's a little complicated. Why does this need to happen? Because atom family returns multiple atoms, does not return one. Each atom will have a specific ID input. Whoever is calling this atom ID, atom family, as we discussed in the last slide, will pass in an input. Okay, bhai, this is my ID. I need the to-do for this specific ID. When that ID reaches here, you need to send the asynchronous backend call for this specific ID. So rather than doing this, which is what we were doing until now, okay, if this was a selector, this was the code. Okay, bhai, if this is a selector, then the get function is an async function, send the to backend call and return it. But since this now is a dynamic selector, it needs to return a different value given a different input. This ID field is dynamic. This changes a bit. This is a function which takes the ID as an input, which returns the final function that you send the outward call from. This syntax we have seen in the last atoms.js. If you go here also the default value was a function that takes ID as an input. So here also the get value needs to be a function that takes an ID as an input. Only it needs to return another function which is asynchronous, which sends the to-do call. This will take some time for you to grasp. Totally should. But if you look at even the selector family docs here, you'll find some variation of this. Let's go through the docs. Returns a function that returns a read-only recall illustrator. A selector family is a popular pattern similar to selector, but allows you to pass get and set callbacks to selector. The selector family usually returns a function which can be used with user-defined parameters. The selector family returns a function which can be used with user-defined inputs. What are user-defined inputs? The ID that I'm passing here. Okay, bhai, the selector for this specific atom is this, and returns a selector. Each unique parameter value returns the same amount of selector instance. Let's see if there is a good example here. There you go. This is the code that very similar to, this is exactly what we're looking at, right? An asynchronous query example. Even though this is just a selector, we need an atom. Let's see if there's an atom family here. I think it might be here. There you go. This is the example that we're looking at right now in our to-do application. We have defined an atom family which has a key, and the default value is a selector family which has a key, and the get has a parameter which returns a function which does your asynchronous function calls. For dynamic default based on other use cases thing, which also has this thing, don't just use selector atom family. Basically, this line basically states, or is like an important thing to know, okay, why you shouldn't use a selector here. Whenever you're using an atom family,
ये फंस गया ये फंस गया भैया फंस गया पे get use नहीं
use
किया
a selector family here. Why? Because if you don't, then you're just creating a single selector. And as we have learned, atom family creates multiple atoms. It does not create a single atom. And if you don't use selector family here, for every atom, the selector will be the same. Which will, for at least, it will have the same key here, which is something we don't want. Which is why, whenever you're using atom family here, use selector family. Key is this. This is the most difficult bit here to understand. The get function here isn't simply a function like we've seen many times now. It is a function which has the input parameters, which returns a function that we've used until now in selectors. This is the only sort of difficult bit to digest here. Let's see how this looks. Let's see if it runs, and then we can try to dive deeper into this.
को खुद को clear नहीं है.
npm install, npm run dev. Again, the same error. Oh, sorry, I need to fix this bit right here. There we go. So if I go here, it says 2 to 1, this is 2 to 1, 2 to 2, this is 2 to 2. It is sending two backend requests. If I go to the network tab here, you will see it sends a request to some server slash to do question mark ID equal to 1 and question mark ID equal to 2. What happens if I put the second to do multiple times? Does it send us a request to the backend for everyone, or does it send it only once? It sends it only once. The value is still cached, similar to how I showed you in the last slide. All of these will point to the same atom now, and each atom will have its own selector.
Okay.
And why did we need to use a selector here? Because we're doing an asynchronous backend call. In the last assignment, we were not. We were just getting it from memory. So in that case, you don't have to.
तो
You
अगर
don't
हम
even need a selector
फंक्शन बनाएंगे तो अपन ऐसे चेंजेस नहीं कर पाएंगे, राइट?
here. You can just write the logic to find that to do. But if you have to hit the backend for every to do, then this needs to be a selector family. Now you have pretty much a decent code base for actually hitting the backend and getting back a to do and rendering it on screen. Given you have the restriction कि हाँ भाई each one of these needs to have a separate backend call. Again, as I said, if you want to really create this, you can create this. I've also exposed on the backend slash to do's endpoint, which returns all the to do's. So you could just use this. But the whole goal was to understand atom family and selector family. And you will see use cases where you will need to create atoms dynamically. That is what atom family lets you do. And if the default value of it needs to be asynchronous, that is where you need to use selector family. All right. That's a brief of atom family, selector family. Did not understand, felt a little overwhelming. Could specifically the selector family bit. Practice is a bit more is all I can say. Amongst all the things that are present here, the most important ones are atoms and selectors. Some of these hooks, not all of them. And if I'm being honest, atom family and selector family is something you should know of. So even if you did not understand it through this video, I think there are a lot of videos on atom family and selector family out there. So you will have to just write a lot of this code. More specifically, just get comfortable with this syntax. This is the line that will most probably confuse you, which is a function which returns a function. If you write it a different syntax, you might be able to understand it better, which was basically the syntax that I wrote below. So try to digest this bit, and that's it. That's all you need to know in recoil. The only other thing that's left is use recoil state loadable and use recoil value loadable, which is what I'm going to discuss next. All right. What is the problem? Do we have another time? We have another. So that's the solution. Okay. Now I'm going to ask you something. So the selector part is done, by the way. Next up, we need to understand two more hooks that recoil gives you. Use recoil state loadable, use recoil value loadable.
1 minute में आया. हाँ तो यार हम क्या हैं? सीधे लगा है. मैंने देखा जब से तुझको देखा कुछ भी न सोचा न समझा Hmm. Okay, now we'll start with
What happens when the values aren't loaded immediately? For example, the to-dos are coming back from the server. How can we show a loader on screen when that is happening rather than just showing an empty state? I showed you a few slides ago. Okay, if this asynchronous backend call takes a lot of time, the screen remains blank. You don't see anything. For example, if I add an artificial delay here for 5 seconds, you will notice if I go back to the website, there's nothing I see for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 seconds, after which I see everything because the backend calls don't even go out. This function sort of remains hung for 5 seconds, after which we're actually sending the backend call. I can totally add this artificial delay on the backend. I can totally, go to a different Wi-Fi that's smaller in speed. All of them would simulate the same thing, which is the backend call is taking a long time. How can I show a loader here when that is happening? There are a few ways. There's also like the suspense API that we talked about a few classes ago that you can use here. But one way is you use, rather than doing a use recoil state, you use recoil state loadable. I repeat, rather than doing this, all you have to do is this. And this guy now returns you a few things. The to-do that you get here, if you hover over it, you can actually see what it returns you. This is all TypeScript. If you don't understand it, it's fine. But it basically returns you these few things. State and contents are the important bits to know. This to-do is no longer your set of to-dos. It is an object which has a few things. Some of those things being contents and state. This state variable represents whether or not this has resolved, whether or not this has returned a value for the first time. If I log state here, let's see what comes.
state true होगा तो ऐसा होगा.
Go back here and refresh. If you go to the log, state is not defined because it's going to be to-do.state. Refresh. And you will see state is logged as loading initially. It basically tells you in the component itself, okay, it is loading. And after 5 seconds, it logs has value. It basically means I can put a check here. If to-do.state equal to loading, then return loading. And then I can add an else if to-do.state equal to has value, then I can render my actual to-do. This will also change a bit. As I said, state is one thing you get here. The other thing is contents. So you don't have a to-do.title. You have to-do.contents.title and to-do.contents.description. Now if I refresh, you will see I see loading.
1, 2, 3, 4,
And then after 10 seconds or 5 seconds, you see the actual to-do. This is how you should actually build an application where, if you're doing asynchronous calls, you don't want the website to be hung for however long this asynchronous call might take. You want to show some feedback, which is why you might have heard of this thing called skeletons or seen skeletons on websites, which are basically something like this. Okay, when something is loading, you can show such a skeleton on screen so that, rather than loading ... a skeleton shows up. So the user knows, okay, something is loading. How can you add a skeleton? We'll see very soon when we reach the styling bit of movie entailment. But rather than showing loading ... you should show a skeleton, which is something you can pretty easily add. What is a skeleton? It's just a div which has some opacity. So that is, this is one way to do this. Okay, you use recoil state loadable, or if you just want the value and don't worry about set to do's, then you can do use recoil value loadable, and pretty much gives the same thing. Okay, now it has to do contains two things. It contains your actual value here whenever it gets resolved, and a state which could be loading, could be has value, it could also be has error. To do.state equal to has error. What if this backend call fails for some reason? What if it does not give you data? What if it gives you 500 status code? I can actually simulate an error here. Okay, some error is thrown. Backend call failed. The same thing would happen if this asynchronous call failed for some reason. If my backend is down, if I hit an endpoint that doesn't exist, let's say I hit this endpoint. In this case, this should throw an error, or this will throw an error, in fact. And you can catch that here as well. Okay, by the backend call failed, and then you can show to the user error while getting data from backend. Now if I refresh after 5 seconds, it says error while getting data from backend. Basically means neither is the data loading anymore, neither did I get a value. The backend threw an error. If I refresh, if I open the console as well, you will see both the backend requests fail because that endpoint doesn't exist. I've put in a erroneous endpoint there. Both of these calls failed with a state. What does failed mean? It means the status code isn't in the 200 series. It's a 400 or 500 status code. And so Axios sort of throws an error here. As I said, you can also throw an error like this. But again, Axios library also throws an error. If you use fetch, that will also throw an error when this specific endpoint fails. And right
as value or cap
now, since this endpoint throw an error
as error
like this, but again, Axios library also throws an error. If you use fetch, that will also throw an error when this specific endpoint fails. And right now, since this endpoint doesn't exist, we get a 404 from the server, and that puts in this hook, okay, by the thing failed, So you can handle this more gracefully. What would happen
use recoil value loading. Loading.
if I'm not using loadable here, if I'm just using use recoil value, what would happen if I refresh
कुछ नहीं होगा.
after 5 seconds? Bunch of errors here. Error, basically your app will literally crash. If you have, let me put some hi there above this. Hi there, refresh.
चलेगा ही नहीं.
Where is the hi there? As it is loading. And then eventually even the hi there does not appear because your application actually crashed, which basically blows up your DOM. So you should handle these errors more gracefully. And how do you do that? This is one way of doing it, which is use recoil value loadable and use recoil state loadable. Another way is the suspense and the error boundary API, which happy to discuss at some point, even though I would urge you to understand these yourself, or like at least Google these yourself. Basically, if I have a use recoil value of something that takes some time, I can wrap all of
अभी
that inside the
टाइम
suspense
मिला तो इसके ऊपर वीडियो
with the
बनाऊंगा.
fallback equal to self. Basically, if I have a use recall value, understand these yourself, or like at least Google
Suspense API और error boundary API. तो ये कल अपन को हैंडल करना.
these yourself. Basically, if I have a use recall value of something that takes some time, I can wrap all of that inside the suspense with the fallback equal to loading. And now if I refresh, use recoil value is not defined. If I refresh, you see a single loading, slightly cleaner than loading that we saw, and then eventually it crashes, so you see nothing. But you can also add something called an error boundary here, which does not exist in functional components, so you have to get into class-based components. So we're happy to take a special video on both suspense and error boundary, but that's another way for you to fall back to something while your hook is loading. But what is the other way? It is use recoil value loadable. You can use which, if you use recoil value loadable, then you don't need suspense. Even suspense won't trigger when you do a use recoil value loadable. But if you do a use recoil value, then suspense will trigger and you will see this loading dot on the screen. Happy to discuss this in a different video. That is all I had for today. Slides I will post very soon, and hopefully was insightful. You understood at least atom and asynchronous queries and selectors. If you understood atom family, great. If you understood selector family, also beautiful. I think that was one part which can still be a little confusing, which we can practice a bit more and understand. You don't need a lot. I mean, you don't see a lot of selector families in your application, thankfully. And if you really want, you can go little unoptimal and use atoms everywhere and not use selector family. But with practice, if this wasn't clear, hopefully that becomes clear with time. That's it for this one. I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye bye. Our battery is almost
Thank
dead.
you. Week 7 खत्म. So I will take a break now for 15 minutes. Then I will do some CP learning. I'll today learn Axios versus Fetch. तो आज का प्लान मैं लिख लेता हूँ. 60 days, day 7 plan. Recoil deep dive हो गया. दूसरा Axios versus Fetch ये करना है. तीसरी चीज आज कल STL तो हो गया. रात में तो आज टाइम नहीं मिलेगा. अभी बैठ जाता हूँ करने भाई ये सब. ठीक है. आज सारे वीडियोस बनाऊंगा जो मेरे एक्सप्लेन करने बचे हैं. राइट. ठीक है, अभी के लिए स्ट्रीम तो स्टॉप करता हूँ.